Argentina should be one of the most powerful countries in the world. Just 100 years ago, it had a GDP even higher than the United States of America. But something went wrong. Instead of rising to superpower status, Argentina spiraled into a cycle of economic crises, inflation, and political instability. So how did it happen? And is there a path for Argentina to rise again? Its geography set it up for success. For starters, it possesses some of the best agricultural land on Earth, the Pampas region. This vast expanse, covering much of Argentina, along with parts of Brazil and Uruguay, is flat, fertile, and experiences consistent rainfall and mild temperatures year-round. These conditions make it ideal for agriculture. Argentina boasts 32.5 million hectares of arable land, ranking 9th in the entire world. And the soil is extremely fertile, especially in the Pampas, where nutrient-rich molluscs dominate. Agricultural land use is roughly divided between cultivated crops and pasture land, with maps showing how the Pampas sustain intensive grain farming, while drier regions like Patagonia support lower density grazing. Luckily, Argentina benefits from a remarkably stable climate as well. All year round, with an average temperature of around 60 degrees Fahrenheit or 16 degrees Celsius, the country experiences fewer weather-related disruptions than other major agricultural producers, enabling consistent output across all the seasons. This climate reliability, combined with the vast arable land, cements Argentina's status as a global agricultural powerhouse. Beyond agriculture, Argentina's geography provides natural defenses. The Andes, the longest mountain range in the world, form an imposing western barrier with peaks reaching nearly 7,000 meters, including Aconcagua, the highest mountain outside of Asia. These mountains run along Argentina's entire western border, protecting the country from potential land invasions and also acting as a climatic barrier that influences precipitation patterns. To the east, the choppy Atlantic Ocean provides a formidable natural boundary. To the north, multiple rivers and forested regions offer additional protection. These rivers aren't just barriers, though. They also provide fresh water, hydroelectric power, and crucial transportation routes. Argentina's rivers serve as critical transportation links, connecting inland agricultural regions to major ports. The Paraná-Paraguay waterway allows goods to travel thousands of kilometers from Argentina's heartland to the Atlantic, providing an economic advantage that many landlocked countries lack. Studies show that landlocked nations experience, on average, 6% less economic growth due to their reliance on neighboring countries for trade access. Argentina's direct access to the Atlantic spares it from these constraints, enabling seamless global commerce. Argentina's maritime positioning is further strengthened by the Rio de la Plata, a river so wide, most consider it a gulf, or even just its own ocean. Here it is next to the English Channel, the section of ocean between the UK and France. Regardless of classification, its sheer size and depth allow for significant maritime activity. While Argentina has several natural harbors, it also has potential for artificial port development, which could further enhance its trade capabilities and economic resilience. Buenos Aires, originally founded as a port in 1580, sits on the Rio de la Plata shores and remains a vital economic hub. Today, its port is the 5th busiest in South America, further reinforcing Argentina's position in international trade. Argentina's coastline is huge, over 5,000 kilometers long, granting it access to global trade and rich fishing waters from which it harvests nearly 1 million tons of fish every year. It's also rich in natural resources, ranking 3rd in global lithium reserves and 4th in production, 9th in silver, 17th in gold, and 7th in boron. The latter, though lesser known, is a crucial mineral in glassmaking, ceramics, and industrial applications, further diversifying Argentina's resource potential. It has the largest natural gas reserves in South America and ranks 2nd on the continent in oil reserves, losing only to Venezuela. These assets should have fueled long-term prosperity, and at one point, it kinda did. 100 years ago, Argentina was an economic powerhouse. At its peak in 1896, Argentina's GDP per capita was actually higher than that of the United States. In 1913, Argentina had the 7th to 10th highest GDP per capita in the world, depending on the source, surpassing Germany, Italy, France, and Spain. Yet today, Argentina ranks 89th, a dramatic fall from grace. From the late 19th century through the early 20th, Argentina was the top destination for investment and immigration. Its pro-immigration policies led to millions of Europeans, primarily Italians and Spaniards, flocking to Buenos Aires, which became known as the Paris of South America. Argentina actively encouraged immigration by offering to subsidize travel costs for newcomers. As a result, its population quadrupled between 1870 and 1914. With its booming economy and the promise of opportunity, Argentina was seen as the rising economic superpower, poised to challenge the United States for dominance in the Americas. Yet, over the past century, Argentina has gone through 9 national bankruptcies, a pattern of economic crises that has repeatedly erased progress and driven the country to the brink of collapse. The cycle of financial instability is nothing new. It's been ingrained in Argentina's economic history for decades. Its reliance on an agricultural export economy controlled by a landowning elite left it vulnerable to global shift. Unlike the United States, where land redistribution enabled small-scale farmers to drive industrialization, Argentina's economy remained concentrated in the hands of a few large estate owners. These elites resisted modernization, preferring to extract wealth from the land rather than reinvesting in industry. As the global markets evolved, Argentina failed to diversify, leaving it exposed to external shocks. One of the key factors behind Argentina's decline has been its government's reliance on printing money to cover expenses. Instead of addressing systemic issues, leaders have continuously resorted to short-term fixes that ultimately drive up inflation. Under Juan Domingo Perón, Argentina once had the highest working-class salaries in Latin America, but its heavy government spending and nationalization policies laid the groundwork for economic instability. Perón was inspired by elements of both fascism and socialism, and his welfare state was immensely popular, yet unstable in the long run. Decades later, Argentina still struggles with the same economic problems: overspending, inflation, and debt. When the Great Depression hit in the 1930s and global demand for commodities plummeted, Argentina had no other industries to fall back on. The completion of the Panama Canal in 1914 had already diverted trade away from Argentina, reducing its role as a major shipping hub. Meanwhile, other nations were shifting towards industrialization, but Argentina remained overly dependent on agriculture. By the 1940s, Argentina's economic policy had shifted from export-driven growth to domestic-focused development, a transition that ultimately led to inefficiencies, inflation, and financial instability. Perón discouraged foreign investment, isolating Argentina from the global economy at a time when other nations were benefiting from post-war globalization. Even after Perón was removed from power in the 1950s during a coup, his economic philosophy remained deeply entrenched in Argentine politics. By the 1970s, Argentina was suffering from soaring inflation, economic stagnation, and mounting debt. To distract from these problems, the ruling military dictatorship launched an ill-fated invasion of the Falkland Islands in 1982. The Falklands War was not just a military conflict. It was a desperate attempt by the Argentine government to divert public attention from the country's worsening economic crisis. The military dictatorship, facing growing unrest due to inflation and economic mismanagement, gambled on a nationalist war to regain popularity. The war ended in defeat, but its consequences were far-reaching. It accelerated the fall of the dictatorship, deepened Argentina's financial ruin, and ushered in a lost decade of stagnation. Argentina was left economically bankrupt with no clear path forward. Between 1975 and 1990, Argentina's GDP per capita fell by more than 20%, and inflation averaged an astonishing 300% per year. During this period, Argentina faced some of the worst inflation rates in modern history. By the late 1980s, annual inflation exceeded 3,000%, rendering the currency nearly worthless and devastating household savings. To add to its troubles, Argentina experienced a severe economic downturn from 1998 to 2002, often referred to as the Argentine Great Depression. This crisis culminated in 2001 when Argentina defaulted on more than $100 billion in sovereign debt, the largest default in world history at that time. This led to bank runs, mass protests, and the resignation of multiple presidents in rapid succession. Argentina's economic collapse in the early 2000s was not an isolated event. It was the latest chapter in a long history of financial disasters. In the 1990s, Argentina pegged the peso to the US dollar in an attempt to stabilize inflation. While this move initially worked, it also removed the government's ability to print money, forcing Argentina to rely on borrowing. When it lost access to IMF funding in the early 2000s, the entire system unraveled, leading to mass unemployment, widespread poverty, and another devastating default. Despite multiple opportunities to reform, Argentina has continually repeated the same mistakes, reinforcing the idea that it never misses an opportunity to miss an opportunity. For the past 2 decades, Argentina has oscillated between periods of moderate growth and renewed crises. Government spending consistently exceeds revenues, leading to more debt, currency devaluation, and inflation, which in 2022 reached over 100%. Even in recent years, Argentina has struggled with hyperinflation exceeding 100%, eroding wages and wiping out savings. The government continues to print money recklessly, further fueling inflation and economic instability. Despite its vast resources and economic potential, Argentina remains trapped in a cycle of financial crises, where each new solution seems to create the next disaster. Without fundamental reforms, the country will likely continue this pattern, repeating the same failures over and over that have plagued it for over a century. Despite its struggles, struggles, the country remains one of the wealthiest in Latin America. Its geography has served as a safety net, preventing complete economic collapse. And Argentina continues to attract investment in areas like lithium and natural gas. Given its long history of economic mismanagement, the question remains, will Argentina ever learn from its mistakes? For now, Argentina's future remains uncertain, and while its past shows glimpses of what could have been, its present is a reminder of what happens when bad policies persist for too long.